Okay. So welcome.
Hi, thanks so much, Thomas.
Um, yeah. So we met, I think, two times before, right? One time in this virtual space and one time
Yeah.
physically, actually. Um, and I wanted to invite you into this space that I call Full Circle, and which we use to explore and learn about how can we steer ourselves into a good world. And the way this works is that there's conversations like these, and there's a Substack um, with about 1,600 people who read what happens there, and all of the conversation is transcribed and added to a Rome graph. Rome graph is a way of associatively connecting written content,
Mm.
and this allows us to see cross connections between everything. So, everybody who's ever taken part in a conversation, because sometimes there's group conversations, sometimes there's conversations like this, sometimes people come in um, and join us with their questions. Might happen, um, uh, uh, but um, but I doubt it this morning because otherwise people would have been here already. Um, and the leading question today is you. So we would like to, I would like to um, learn from you in how you approach contributing towards making the planet a good place. What do you do? Why do you do what you do? And where I think this is best started is in some contextualization.
Mm.
So, who are you? Why are you? um, what are you? So, how did you turn into what you are? Right.
Mm.
And so let's begin there. Give us a little deep dive into Rich,
Okay.
and and from there we will then go into, okay, what is it that you do concretely in the world to move us forward into a good future.
Great. Thank you so much, Thomas, for inviting me to this space. Um, I think what I'll do is I'll share a little where I'm physically, where I
Mm-hmm.
live physically. So I'm in Cornwall, which is in the southwest of Great Britain. It's kind of like a little toe, the foot of Great Britain. Some say it's a different country. It's certainly got Celtic roots. And I've been living here for about 21 years. And 21, 22 years in a little wooden house with a tin roof in the middle of a wood on a cliff overlooking the sea. So a very beautiful
Wow.
place.
Mm-hmm.
And fortunate when I came down, it was one of the reasons I came down was to work at a place, an educational charity called the Eden Project.
Mm-hmm.
And the Eden Project it's a place focusing on connecting people with nature, with each other, to create a more sustainable future, more positive future. And yeah, I started there 2000 when it was still a hole in the ground. It's an old China clay pit, and then in there, the largest rainforest in captivity, you could call it, or the largest greenhouse is there. These large biomes.
Mm-hmm.
So we share our relationship with nature through the lens of plants in that Eden Project. There are going to be more, which I'll speak of later.
Mm-hmm.
And my job at the moment is designing and delivering programs to connect people with nature and with their true nature, which is called Hothouse. And I love it. I've been there for a long time, and it feels as if it's ever changing and growing, and I feel very fortunate to be part of that.
What led you there? So what was life before 21 years ago?
So I used to live up a mountain in North Wales. I mean, you know, comparatively small, but it was above the snow line. And I was studying with different Native American teachers previous to that. And so I ran workshops and had a practice of shiatsu and different types of coaching, counselling, etc., different healing modalities. And I used to go back to London, share that, and then retreat back up to the hills of North Wales and enjoy myself up there. But it was during that time, there's an Ojibwe medicine man who showed me maps of what the earth would look like in 2075, or how the seers from that tradition had predicted. And it was shocking.
What did it look
This
like?
was like 35 years ago. It was utterly shocking, because the world looked very, very different. And it was this story of how humanity would respond that was probably the most terrifying. And to be honest, you know, we were sharing ceremony, and it was during that time I made a vow that I would dedicate my life to whatever way would reduce suffering as these earth changes manifested. And in a sense, that's what led me to Eden, because I thought I had a vision that Eden would not just be in one place, but would evolve to lots of different places around the earth. Hence me still being there, and there's now a project in Qingdao. I've shared the Hothouse program, Nature of Leadership, in Chengdu, and I think our relationship with China and Asia is very important in terms of the growth of a regenerative future. So that's all fair, but Eden's a bit like an ocean liner, and it's going pretty slowly. And with the challenges becoming more and more obvious, I felt that a dream that I'd been holding for a long time, which was inspired reading a story called The Very Hungry Caterpillar to my daughter. I don't know if you know that story. But
No, I don't. I'm not sure. Well,
it's a beautiful story, kid's story, and it's basically about a caterpillar that eats and eats and eats and eats, creates a cocoon, turns into a butterfly. And my daughter got to the why stage, and so she said, what happens in the cocoon, Daddy? I didn't know, so like, okay, check this out, you know. And it said imaginal cells. I was like, what's this? I didn't know anything about this. Inside a caterpillar, there are imaginal cells, which are different from the rest of the cells. They're dormant. They're not active. However, when it makes a cocoon, they begin to start coming alive, start turning into clusters of discs, cells, which then communicate with each other more and more and more, and then the blueprint of the butterfly appears. I was astonished. And I heard about a woman called Elizabeth Sahtouris, who's an evolution biologist. I didn't even know evolution biologists existed, but they do. And was just enthralled by her storytelling of life evolving. And she talked about how we're like the imaginal cells of the earth. And when I heard this, I had a vision of this map of all the people of the earth who are creating beauty and amazing projects now, being able to come together so that we could see ourselves, each other, and then collaborate. And it's in the telling of the story and the sharing of the story, for me, that where the real power lies. And I'll maybe talk about that later. That's probably enough of a contextualization. So, to cut a long story short, we created the Imaginal Collective, and now I'm really excited about how this is going to evolve.
Cool. So you're doing many things, but two primary things. One is the Eden Project, and the other one is Imaginal Collective, which is a way to show the imaginal cells all around the globe, right?
Yeah.
So before we go there, because that's the hopeful part, I'd like to explore a little bit more about that vision in 27.5, because I am going to turn 100 then that year, and so I really want to know what I have to expect at my 100th birthday.
That's a good question. So for me, these prophecies, this map is a prophecy. And there was a medicine man called Mad Bear. A great book about him by Doug Boyd. And in that, he talked about these forthcoming earth changes. And he said, wouldn't it be great if we could get all the prophecies together? And he's departed, but some people who understood the importance of this work got together and brought all the prophecies together. And in doing so, and having had a look at these for quite a number of years, I've begun to realize more and more that all of these prophecies have a similar tale, one of destruction, one of a really deep time of suffering for humanity, for all beings. But there's a part of this story that's not being told. And this is, in a sense, I think, I didn't realize it at the time, but one of the reasons I'm at Eden and connecting with the Imaginal Collective. And I'd like to share it in reference to the Hopi prophecy rock. I don't know if that's something you know,
no,
but
I don't know.
So in the southwest of America, the Hopi nation, there's a place in the desert where there's a rock, and it has a diagram on it. And to simplify it, there's kind of like there's a fork in the road. There's a choice point. And one of those roads is predicted to be really destructive, very, very, a lot of suffering. Another part of the road connects down with the earth again, and it looks like it's a path that's in harmony with the earth. In the same way, there's a prophecy called the seventh fire, the way it's described as the seventh fire, and it talks again of this destruction, but it also talks about a time of great peace and love and brotherhood and sisterhood. And I've been, earlier this year, this idea of the sleeping beauty. This is this choice point that we have. And we've been told these stories of how terrible things are going to be. We're fed them all the time about how bad things are and how they're going to be. Apocalyptic films, books, stories, news. We're bombarded with it daily. However, what we're not told is, what is the other choice? What does it look like? What does this other journey look like? And in the Grimm's story of Sleeping Beauty, there's a moment when the prince asks, how I've heard the story of this place where there's a Sleeping Beauty, And this older man says, "Oh, you don't bother. Loads of princes have tried this before, and it didn't work out well for them."
Mm-hmm.
However, he says, "I have no fear. This is important. I have no fear. I will try."
Mm-hmm.
When he comes to this mass wall of thorns, it opens up and they turn into flowers, and he walks through and he awakens the sleeping beauty. We know that part of the story. But for me, this wall of thorns is like the news that we're being fed, the social media that we're being fed, this constant horrific, terrifying story of what the future is going to hold. And actually, right now, as I'm sure you're well aware, there are literally millions of people who are imagining a very different future. And in my heart, the idea of sharing these stories, connecting, people being able to connect and collaborate and understand that we're not on our own, we're not these isolated imaginal selves. Actually, the imprint is very close to happening, but we just can't see it yet. So the answer to your 2075 is that for many years I held a really dark dream of what the future was going to look like. Mm-hmm. And it affected me psychologically and physically, actually. And so I went on a journey to learn how to hold this in a different way. And that's where I'm at now. Yeah.
Nice. Okay. So
your 100th birthday might be really good, actually.
I'm sure. Well, I mean, the way I translate into the language of or into another language, what you just described is, or one way one could do that is the limits to growth scenarios. And what they described, if you look at that, there are three more relevant scenarios among the 12 they originally described. One is business as usual, which is the path that leads towards this devastating future. And there's hardly any doubt about that if we follow that path, that this leads there, right? So that's the choice point. The second one is what they call comprehensive technology, which is a way to say that we come up with technology that is that can mitigate the problems we've already created and integrate negative externalities of their own processes in such a way that we can live in balance with the planet. And the third one is what they call stabilized world. And that path is more defined by its social and psycho-technologies rather than physical technologies. And so we definitely don't want to continue walking down the business as usual path. And this is why people are putting a lot of hope into the comprehensive technology path. But that is, in a way, similar to getting on a plane in full awareness that there's a 30% probability that this plane will crash. You will not get on that plane. Why 30%? Because it's with every day that passes, it's increasingly more unlikely that we will have that magical technology appear that solves all of these problems. Right? It can. There is some probability, but it isn't ensured. But the psycho and social technologies that we need to go onto the stabilized world path already exist. And so while it is absolutely of value to follow the comprehensive technology path, I think it is non-negotiable to get on the stabilized world path and resurface, orchestrate, make known all of the psycho and social technologies that were around for a long time already, and that are now being used more again by people, right? And this is where I see what you're doing, making that visible to others, exploring what's there. And so I'm incredibly curious what you find there. What are the beautiful things that you see in your imaginal map network, right? In that collective, because these are the blueprints for my 100th birthday. I just need to know them.
Well, it's evolving. At the moment, the Luciel Foundation, the Holistic Visions Training, there's 144 people from around the world who are, I would say, in some way, shape or form called or dedicated to exactly what you're talking about, this stabilized world. And so we're researching individually, on a group level and collectively, how can we create the collective intelligence to bring together a holistic vision and then put it into practice. How long that's going to take, we don't know, but we're at the moment, that's one of the aspects of, or one of the groups on the Imaginal Collective map who are exploring this reality. And then there's a group of people, the people of the Delicate Lodge, which are ancient teachings from Americas, and that they're beginning to connect there, and there's a large number of trained, what you might call medicine people, connecting in. It's early days yet, and to be honest, we've kind of set things up to the best of our abilities. We've funded it ourselves. We're now at a point now where we really need some support and collaboration to give it the best chance to breathe life into it. I would say that's where we're at the moment. I mean, we're doing lots of other things as well, but I would say that's the main focus right now in terms of the map. We do stuff locally as well, but I think for this conversation, it's more interesting to look at that.
So when you so let's look at the Luciel Holistic Visions first, because I also mentioned that first, and I also know it because that's where we met. That's both part of that. In what ways do you see that as a blueprint of the future? Can we explore that a little?
Well, I think one of the fascinating aspects to this endeavor is that you have some highly functioning human beings coming together, choosing, who already have, I would imagine, pretty busy lives and dedicated lives, but understanding a calling within themselves that they can offer more, but offer more with people who are also willing to transcend ego and to begin to connect in with this collective intelligence so that we don't work in silos. And I think that's something that we're not, in the West, we're not trained to work well collectively together. We've been conditioned or inspired to really forge an individual path. And so letting go of that way of thinking, I think is probably one of the most interesting aspects to the Luciel Foundation's journey with holistic visions.
When you say in the West, that's in contrast to where?
Well, in contrast, I think certainly from what I've noticed, there's a kind of a collective way of working in the East, which is more natural, from what I've seen anyway, to us in the West.
And do you have a feeling about where that comes from in the East, or what's missing here that doesn't allow it?
I'll see if I can articulate this. Perhaps it stems back to language. Perhaps. I'm not a linguist, but the little that I do know of it, my understanding is that when reality is described to people in the West, we label things with nouns. The tree, it. They're all separate entities, things outside of ourselves. Whereas, and again, as I said, I'm not a linguist, but from my understanding, in the East, they describe the world through verbs. So it's in relationship. Everything's in relationship with each other. And so there's this natural understanding that you are a part of nature, a part of everything, and that everything interweaves or is interconnected because it's a living relationship with life. And I wonder if that, and then of course there's the whole, say in China, the whole idea of, offering yourself to the country, to the motherland, and to community, and to family, which is of primary importance. I think what's happening though is that this, the beauty of that way of thinking and the beauty of the individuals coming together, and so it's the best of individual thinking, the best of collective thinking, that we can, as the East and the West come together, we can create this different world.
I wasn't aware that there's such a strong distinction between, I was aware that there are strong distinctions, but that I tried to, while you were speaking, give a tree a description through verbs, and I have no idea how to do it.
Well, it's interesting because the First Nations people, they also talk in a relationship, and words and verbs, and it's a very different way. I remember I studied Chinese medicine as part of my training to be a shiatsu practitioner, and my brain had to really, it took quite a long time to begin to understand that there really was quite a very different way of thinking. And it's nothing to do with it being better. It's just understanding that our when you say it comes down to language, in the dictionary, when you look at nature, and I haven't got the quote here, but what I know of it, I can remember of it. We've defined ourselves out of nature. It talks of nature, everything outside of ourselves, and we've kind of defined ourselves out of the picture, so that we are part from nature rather than a part of nature.
Yeah, and also from ourselves. That's the core argument of Charles Eisenstein, separation, separation from ourselves, from within ourselves, from nature, from the others, from everything. And it's very interesting to hear the idea of the language being a language of relations rather than a language of descriptions. It's very interesting. I'm trying to map it onto the developmental ideas of people like Robert Keegan. Um, Robert Keegan is just one of the developmental psychologists who describe development as of the mind as a growth hierarchy. And so when you in Keegan's model, there are three elements or three layers in the adult mind. You begin with the socialized mind. That's when you have integrated the rules of your society. And you've become, therefore, a trusted member of your society. People know you know the rules and you will stick to them. And so they can ask you to do something or participate in society. And then you step out of that and become a self-authoring mind. And a self-authoring mind is one that starts editing the rules of the socialized mind. And this is a very egoic way of being. Right? It's about you. You're editing the rules of society. You're the boss. And literally, that's also what he observes in the strata of society, that people who are in leadership positions tend to be in self-authoring mindset. People who are not in leadership positions tend to be in socialized mindset. And then there's a third level, which is called the self-transforming mind. And the self-transforming mind becomes non-egoic, becomes a mind of serving the greater good, understanding the connectedness, and that mindset starts editing the heuristics that the self-authoring mind uses to edit the rules of the socialized mind. And what he then further observes is that given enough time, so if you live enough life, you will grow through these levels, inevitably so. And so the more we're busy doing things, the less time we have to live to grow through this, the more we probably stay stuck in the earlier stages. And I'm wondering, as you're speaking, whether there's a possibility that there's some ways to speed this process up, right? Meditation practices have the possibility to speed this up. Certain substances, DMT, has the potential to speed this up. Certain singular experiences can speed this up as well. And as you was describing this, I was wondering whether a certain kind of language might shortcut that path from socialized to self-transforming.
I'm sure. We have, you might see that this little picture in the background here, the imaginal compass. And in the center here, center. There's a butterfly there, and it holds these different, what we call being states. The antennae is Mother Earth and consciousness. And so we understand, well, we believe anyway, or experience, that having a deep connection with nature, and at the same time understanding that you have the choice to shift your consciousness. We know that there are methods to do this, to navigate consciousness, natural ways. That's at the heart of how we believe that the changes are going to happen, or this self-transforming mind can be activated. And then the idea is that we pollinate with each other. and then collaborate. That's the kind of the three: is activating, pollinating, and collaborating.
But language as the connecting tissue of between us, or one important connecting tissue between us, is holds great capacity to as an accelerant.
Absolutely.
And so, have you noticed certain language patterns in for example, the holistics group that might support this assumption?
That's a good question. I haven't considered that in itself. I mean, as like yourself, what I have seen is the judgmental mind shifting, and I think as an example, the way that veganism has exploded into the human consciousness in the past 5 years, and how yoga and meditation, as you mentioned before, meditation, that all of these things which seem to be previously what you might call left field are now a common part of our daily life and language, and you know, the idea of it being a bit hippie-ish and woo-woo and all that kind of stuff is now shifted, certainly in the UK, in a huge way.
Yeah.
But in terms of language that people are using, I think there's an understanding that beauty, you know, the being states that we hold, beauty, love, peace, joy. Actually, this is something, a little story I'd love to share with you, if you don't mind.
Oh, guys.
So when we were coming together with this idea of the Imaginal Collective, we worked with a beautiful shaman from France, Claire Marie, and we journeyed with her. And we journeyed collectively and also journeyed individually. When we went individually, when we came back, we all had the same thought, which was that the roots of the Imaginal Collective are love and joy. And that the discipline of holding love and joy in the face of whatever challenges was really important. And that then led us into an inquiry of what the other being states that we're holding as much as possible in our lives. And that was very different from responding to climate change from a place of fear or anger, frustration or guilt or whatever it might be, an understanding to meet it from this, what you might call a higher consciousness. And so the language, I think people are beginning to, you know, the word love in a sense is almost like a 4-letter word. It's used, it's almost bleached of meaning in a sense, but to use it in a serious way, and I think now is becoming more common and accepted, actually. So
I once spent a weekend with the sea level, the board of a large international company, to support them with some of their strategy work. And one of the things we did on this weekend was to have them individually develop their ikigai.
Oh yeah.
And although that's not the traditional form, we use this typical Venn diagram thing that's like a westernized version of the ikigai. And one of these 4 questions that this tool asks is, what does the world need? And that was the last question I had them answer. And the first ones I let them answer individually or in teams, sparring. That one I let them answer it as a whole group. So now these are imagine 50 plus white males in suits, okay? 14 of them. And I gave them about an hour or something to come up with what does the world need. And they came back with one word. Exactly. They said love. So they knew, or they know, that didn't have any influence on their strategy. But still they knew.
That's interesting that you mentioned that about the strategy. And we also use the Ikigai, a kind of a Westerner's version. Mm-hmm. It's a beautiful form. Mm-hmm. So how do we create the right conditions so that knowing the heart knows this to be the right action? How does this then translate into action? How does that? This is something that we're looking at. I'm sure many people are across the world working in business.
So what are your ideas about this in your experience? What's the best best environment or best tools or best other circumstances that lead to action from this knowledge?
Well, my path has been influenced by incredible teachers who have kind of opened the window or the doorway to nature and our relationship with nature. And there's something about the clarity and purity of nature, I think, which allows the kind of the chattering mind to begin to reduce, and that led in the right way, you begin to realize that you are, there's a constant relationship, there's a constant intelligence, loving intelligence that is seeking to be, to support and to be in relationship with yourself, individually and collectively. And I think when people are immersed in nature and held in a good way, then these natural understandings kind of bubble up. Mm-hmm. And they can then become like a reference point, a conscious reference point that people can then return to, rather like reaching the top of a mountain and having the capacity to see in 360 degrees the beauty around and within. And then inevitably we go down the mountain back into the real world and have our different reactions to that, and maybe forget. I think I loved a chap recently I spoke with who was saying, to come back to that state of consciousness in 2 breaths. I thought that was pretty good going, no matter what's going on.
Yeah. So breathing or grounding oneself in that feeling definitely is a valid way. I would see that too. What that points at for me is what I would call emotional sovereignty. And I to me, the circumstances that allow us to live from a position of love is maximizing emotional, intellectual, and physical sovereignty. So if you can always ground yourself in that feeling, regardless of what's happening around you with 2 breaths, you're on a good path towards emotional sovereignty, right?
Yes.
Doesn't mean you don't feel the emotion, but it means that you are you acknowledge it, but you're partnering with that emotion, right? It's a it's a guide more than than a propellant, right? That's something different. And what we might be lacking at scale is physical sovereignty. So the fear of being cold or starving, very, very fundamental fear that is tied to your activity in the world, and your activity in the world is predetermined by the environment around you, right? So the environment shapes your physical sovereignty. The way you live, or have lived for the last 21 years, is, my guess at least, of pretty high physical sovereignty. And before that, you've worked on emotional sovereignty. That allows you intellectual sovereignty. And I think that these might just be the conditions that you need to be an active or activated imaginal cell. That would be my guess.
Yeah, very, very. I absolutely resonate with what you're saying, and there are, as you know, there are a multitude of different ways. I think certainly listening to, many people, the idea of having some kind of mentor or meeting someone who has already, has, I suppose, embraced the self-transforming mind in whatever way. I think having access to meeting someone for, live is probably one of the most important aspects to this. So this kind of explosion of ways for people to meet these teachers and wisdom keepers is I don't think it's ever happened in Earth's history. The access to this information is quite phenomenal. And that gives me a lot of hope that it's interesting, isn't it, during this time, the past 2 years, just how there's been an explosion of online engagement with internal exploration. How, I've talked about it as like the COVID cocooning, how we're going to emerge. I wonder if conversations that pre the pandemic may have been slightly less engaging, that people now are more than willing to open up to have these kind of conversations. I'm trusting that that's the way.
Would you say there's already discs emerging, or is it still on the cell level?
No, I think there are discs emerging, definitely. I'm not aware of all of them, but they're, you'll have to look at, say, like in the business world, B Corp as one example of organizations who understand regenerative practice is going to be the way forward. And I'm sure we've all worked with some of these companies, and they're now beginning to come together in the understanding that they can, by coming together, they can then influence and create a kind of a pebble in a pool that will ripple out, and there'll be a greater opportunity for others of like-minded people to come together. So, I mean, that's one small example. I've kind of, literally been working for 21 years in a hole in the ground, in a bit of a bubble, and I'm kind of just coming out and having a look to see what else is going on.
Exactly, that's what I mean by the physical sovereignty.
Yeah. So
what does life look like for you? I mean, you described you're in Cornwall in a house, wooden house with a tin roof.
Yeah.
I know wooden houses with tin roofs from the rainforest, but I imagine that could be uncomfortable in Cornwall. How do you make it comfortable?
Well, I've got a nice fire inside. Yeah, I have every kind of thing that you would need to make life easy. It's not a hard journey. I can't get my car down to the house. I have to walk down a coastal path, but it's I'm 15 minutes away from anything. It's a very luxurious life I
Mhm,
lead.
mhm,
You know, I don't want for anything. I'm very lucky, very lucky. As I think, you know, we're aware in the West how incredibly lucky we are. I remember
mhm.
there was a book um, by by sorry, let's think, Fred White. Oh no, I'll remember his name in a minute. Sorry,
Don't worry.
I got slightly distracted there. Something was coming in. Yeah, and he was talking about how in the West for us to have the life that we live now, if we'd been born in Roman times, we'd each need 3,000 slaves.
Yeah.
And when we understand that we're in this 1%,
Mhm. It has 3,000 slaves.
yeah, that we are living this incredibly luxurious life, I think that gives me the gift to consider life in the ways that I have without having to constantly be worried about
Mhm,
where's my next meal going to come from and will I have enough water and
mhm.
etc. So
Yeah, I mean, if you look at it, roughly, we're talking about roughly 10% of the maybe 15 of the global population living like we do. And the rest are working for us. And once they discover that, and that they don't have to work for us because they're just working for money, and money is useless and worthless, then it's going to be an interesting moment.
yeah.
And I can't wait for that to happen. The sooner, the better.
And how do you think that, you know, through technology do you feel that that's what's evolving, this
Well,
greater awareness?
I'm deeply grateful for this technology that we're using here right now. Um, and um, I mean, this is what we're using to weave that web right at the moment globally. Um, if that were to go away, I'm not sure what we could do. Right? Um, it 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 could have the potential that people go back. So let's say if we don't have computers and internet connections anymore, this means that we also don't have normal supply lines anymore. Right? That's all interlinked, and they're breaking down in tandem. So if that happens, then people will run out of food in the stores and toilet paper and all of these things that they think they need very, very quickly. Um, and what will happen then? Well, people will be forced to find food somewhere. So they will go to the country. Right? There's no other way. Because if we don't have internet, we also probably don't have electricity. If we don't have electricity, there's no water in your flat in the city. Right? There's no heating, there's nothing. Um, and um, and that's, well, you're not going to make a fire in your apartment, right? So you're better off in a tent at that point. And so you, that's what people will do in that moment. And then what will they do then? Well, but they know they cannot survive alone because they have no clue how to. So they will cluster.
Yeah.
Yeah, they will do what we know best. Evolution never selected for sapiens. Evolution selected for groups of sapiens. For collaboration. And so they'll cluster and they start helping each other and they start building something. And it'll be busy enough not to have two massive fights with the neighbors. So that's good, right? So the most for most people, the most devastating scenario could actually turn into a really, really nice scenario with some suffering in between. The the hope, of course, is that we find ways of creating abundant energy without hurting any part of the global ecosystem. Producing and storing and transporting that energy, preferably producing it wherever we are. And because that could be the driving force for physical sovereignty on the individual level. And then through that, enable us to redesign our social technologies, right? Come up with new ways of governing ourselves. Freeing ourselves from the multipolar trap that we've created through voted politicians who have to answer to short-term marketing cycles, right? If they really speak the truth, they will not be elected or re-elected.
Yeah, they
cannot. So that's it. It's a game that optimizes towards superficiality, and they're in lock with the other side of the game, which is optimization for profit, which is required for the financial system not to break down. And core success metric of politics is the core success metric of the financial system not breaking down, which is GDP.
Yeah.
So all of this linkage is extremely hard to break unless people know how to feed themselves. And I think that's where it starts. If everybody starts feeding themselves, be it with their vertical garden run by solar power in their flat, all the way to building geodesic domes and beautiful landscapes underneath that grow bananas in the middle of Europe, and do that at scale. Yeah, well, that's not high tech even. We can do that today. So from that end, I'm super grateful that we have this technology and the possibility to have this kind of exchange. I am convinced that through that shared knowledge that or that knowledge sharing that's happening right now all across the planet about these kinds of dealing with situations, we will be able to reduce the suffering somewhat. But still, in the worst scenario, we will lose billions of people. Yeah. Because billions of people are not, they would really need some high tech, right? We're in a really good situation here. But if you look at people in India whose farms have just been washed away and their entire life is gone. Yeah. They just cannot go back to that place. It's impossible for them to rebuild it because the climate has changed so much that it just won't grow. They go to the city. The city's already overloaded, and it's actually not the city, it's a slum. So they're living in some shack in the slum. They're overheating because these places are getting close to bulb temperatures, meaning there will be points where people simply cannot live because of the temperature and the humidity being too high. And they don't have access to any kind of air conditioning or travel to other places or anything like that, right? So while I'm not worried about us 10%ers in the westernized world, even in the worst case scenario, I'm deeply worried about the rest. Because they might be closer to all of that knowledge still, but the breakdown of the environment is so much faster in that area. Yeah. And I think there's some concerted action required to solve that, but that's not an interest of the game. So we have to change the game before we can go and help those people.
Yeah, absolutely. So the big question, how does that happen then?
Yeah, that's why we're talking. That's why we're trying to figure this out.
Exactly. But something that I think is beautiful, I was at COP26 last year, and for the first time, you just had a sense that everybody was committed, and there was no kind of sense of, oh, this isn't happening, or which is a remark. I mean, we kind of take it for granted that everybody goes, well, of course it's happening, but it's not that long ago that there were an awful lot of people saying that you're talking rubbish.
Climate what? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. So that shift, I'm again hopeful that shift in the collective consciousness of humanity is we're now beginning to realize that we've got to make some serious choices. And I think you mentioned about this short-term thinking, and it may be that whether it's in the States or the UK or other democratic elections, there's this kind of flip-flop, a bit like, I kind of see it like a dead fish flopping, one year it's 4 years it's this, then it's 4 years of that, then they undo this, and we don't get anywhere. Whereas China, they have a long-term vision and the capacity to put that into practice. So I think if there's one of the most important things is us sharing our stories between Asia and the West, understanding that we've so much to share with each other, to inspire each other and to grow together. I think it's crucially important, rather than feeding into these divisive stories about nations and ways of pitting ourselves up against the other, so-called. To transcend that thinking is going to be crucial.
Do you have a way to help people understand their human connectedness quickly?
I think some, simple asking people questions that allow them to remember that state of being.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's, if we talk about love, I would imagine pretty much every single parent, if you mention their child, will evoke that unconditional love pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's a very good reference point. I think also if you say, what is there a time in life when you have been in nature and felt at peace? Most people will have some kind of reference point in relation to that. I think also in terms of Reboot the Future talk about the golden rule. We're doing some work with them, and they talk about the golden rule: treat others as you'd like to be treated yourself, including the planet.
Mm-hmm.
Treat others and the planet as you'd like to be treated yourself. And these simple thoughts and questions are probably some of the quickest ways. To be honest, again, it's just to do with awareness. So having a shower, it's every single moment, isn't it? Having a cup of coffee, eating some chocolate, having a banana. Where's this come from? Just being mindful of where everything is that you're experiencing, how long it's taken to get to this moment of physical manifestation in front of you. Appreciation, actually, acting, having the capacity to observe and let go of this judgmental mind, to just be in observance through the senses and be present, and then allow yourself to become aware of what you appreciate. So activating the appreciator within oneself. These two things, I think, can break different patterns, distorted thinking about perceiving reality. There's some of the ways. And doing, you know, we each have our own ways. I love listening to music and dancing, so that gets me in a good state.
And as you said earlier, we know, right? Our heart knows. There's also another Charles Eisenstein, right? The more beautiful world a heart knows is possible.
Yeah.
We already know, and I mean, it's taken me. Let's say I think I had some pretty good clarity of what's happening when I was 15 or 16, because I wasn't yet thrown into the overwhelming complexity of Western life. But as soon as you have to start paying bills and stuff like that, and filling forms and all of these games, then this fog raises up, and it takes a while to like move through that fog and come out the other end, and see clear again. So yeah, what the question is finding ways of getting through that fog passage as quickly as possible, or guiding people out, and maybe we can use some simple metaphors like you mentioned China. If you have a strong lighthouse, a strong 200-year vision, and some people with some brutality making that happen, right? Then it'll happen, right? And we have to ask ourselves, how much of the downsides of that mode do we want? Or can we afford, right? Or do we need? How much of that do we need, maybe? Because I noticed that people who are highly aware and very much in the being mode tend to drop out of the doing mode. And I think that's a problem. I mean, you clearly are in the doing mode. You're building things concretely, right? You're changing atoms in the world. But there's many people who are in the being mode and fully present in with their banana or their beautiful milkshake under the palm tree, but they're not in doing mode. They don't activate themselves into this, and so the activation again, right? We were there 20 minutes ago. The activation is the key.
Yeah.
And either you have somebody like Xi Jinping, or can we become our own dictator? Right? What is how do you create a discipline in yourself to do the work you do instead of enjoying the beautiful life you've built, right? You could do that. There's no need for you to go out in the world and do these things, right? So how do you discipline yourself to do that? That's an interesting question I'd like to explore.
Nice question. I think I'd like to refer back to a moment with someone called Beautiful Painted Arrow. who's from the Tiwa tribe in the southwest of Americas. And I was very fortunate to meet him and participate in ceremonial dances. One of the dances called the drum dance. So you dance for 3 days, backward and forward, no food, no water. In between you rest. In between the dances you rest and dreaming. And I think it was the second, because you do a series of these dances over the years. I think it was the second dance that I took part in. And the very clear answer was that life's about giving. That the purpose of life is to give. In the same way that the plant nation and the animal nation give of their lives, the human has the choice to also offer themselves to life. You know, as you were talking about the self-transforming mind. And I think from that place, and also I think taught discipline in the pure form by studying, as I was saying, Shiatsu, but also Zen and a movement system called Seishin Kitaido with Ken Waite. I was very lucky to meet a great teacher. And so I think you learn about discipline, you strengthen that capacity and understand that in a strange way you've no choice, that it's essential that you do this. It's essential actually. And that, you know, the discipline of peace or the discipline of love or the discipline of joy. You know, when I don't know about you, but I certainly was brought up in, certainly in the UK, I was brought up in Scotland, and the kind of the social glue was to moan about how bad things were. And you know, in Scotland, it's like we start off with how bad the weather is, and then we proceed to tell each other other aspects of our lives that are pretty shit, rather than immediately, you know, sharing the gifts or the sovereignty that you talk of. You know, what are the gifts that we're experiencing in our lives? And so I think we can begin to look at not only the internal dialogue that's that we've been conditioned with, that we can, with the neuroplasticity, we can begin to change these ways of thinking with repeating again and again, creating new neural pathways, and then the actions, and so that, like you mentioned before, we can become a lighthouse. Each of us can become a lighthouse, and the idea of the map is that there's these points of lights all over the world beginning to connect. And I think, you know, I think having a teacher really helps, actually. Having someone that you're accountable to, someone who can, you know.
There's an interesting question that I've run into in these processes, that in a way you're recoding yourself, right?
Yeah.
There's some programming, the Scottish programming, whining about the weather,
Yeah.
and you decide that this is, for some reason, you decide this is not the right programming you want to have, and this is different programming, and you proceed to rewrite that code actively yourself, and you upgrade yourself.
Yeah.
Now, I've heard from people that they object to that because then they're not themselves anymore. Right? They rewrite themselves, they're not themselves anymore. But while that's the point, that you're not that self anymore, but you're a new self that you like better, and you deliberately got there, they still perceive this as being inauthentic. How do you stand on that?
I think that's a really powerful truth, actually. Very powerful truth. You know, in Zen they talk of, in the beginning, trees are trees and mountains are mountains, and then trees are not trees and mountains are not mountains, and then at the end it's trees are trees and mountains are mountains. And it's that understanding that the essence, the true essence, our original nature, is immeasurable and constant. And that the journey that one goes on.
Let me check what's going on.
Okay.
Somebody visiting, or she's just excited. I don't know.
Where is she? What kind of
She
dog?
wants to go out. Let's see.
Does she? Okay, let her.
Bist du raus, Lili? Komm. Ja, she wants out.
That's lovely, actually. That's a very good reminder that these instincts that we have, whether we call it intuition or instincts, the heart mind knows the right action. And I think what happens is that we begin to realize that some of the decisions we're making have come from a distorted process. And I think, certainly from my experience, there was a moment when I began to get so, you talk about the being states, is that it was almost became frozen in the understanding of what the consequences are of each action. That you almost don't want to act at all, because you understand that in the process of acting there's going to be something's going to die, something's going to suffer, there's going to be a consequence. And I think that, being in a group, whether it's a sangha or whatever you call it, being in a group allows you to change, allows you to transform. If you're just on your own, it's a pretty tough journey, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
And that being in a group, some kind of group, can really help with that transformation.
Which then has its own dangers. So there's dynamics that can happen in groups, right? And that can turn into cults.
Absolutely.
and that points back to the sovereignty part, right? If you're in a cult, you stop being intellectually sovereign, right? So so I keep coming back to that for some reason, whichever way I look at it, that the sovereignty, which is not independence, right? But only the possibility to independence is crucial. And I think that also, in a way, answers the question I just posed. I didn't know that before, but something in what you said triggered that, because if you sense that what you're doing is not aligned with some essence that might be there or not, but it's not aligned, then maybe the you you're experiencing right now is not the you you want to be, because the you you want to be is aligned. So you're not an authentic expression of yourself in the way you are right now. You're an authentic expression of yourself when you're aligned. So recoding yourself towards being more aligned is actually an expression of the deep authenticity from that perspective.
Absolutely. I mean, something that I've been trained in and work with is this, that we call it the imaginal compass. And there's different states of consciousness or mind voices. And it's the understanding that being in the center, whether it's, you label it as sovereign or or command, or I don't know if I call it a dictator, but this sense of vastness, this vast beauty. And then that you can choose or command or these different mind voices within the self, the capacity to be present. We talked about that, the capacity to have predictive intelligence, or to know what is the right action. I think learning some way of recalibrating one's mind, and how it. What is this? Lovely Ian Gilchrist talks about the Einstein saying that the mind of reason is the servant to the intuition, or I can't remember the phrase. I don't know if that reminds you of, but this idea that the reason
something, but
is not to make sure that the reason doesn't become the master, and that the intuition is the master, and that the reason serves that master.
What if there is no master? What if there's the master is a concept which is balance, and there's no entity that is the master? So what you need to achieve is a balance between, rather than something in the lead.
Exactly. So as you can see, that we've got a circle here. So each of these states of consciousness or intelligences within the human have equal status, and as you say, it needs to be in balance like a wheel, so that it can move, constantly changing, but that it's in balance. So yeah, I agree, absolutely. And often what happens is we'll get really good at one of these aspects, the being aspect, being present, and we get stuck there, not realizing that we have the capacity for predictive intelligence, or to connect with our life stories, to keep us on purpose, and to follow that North Star of right action, and the heart understanding and knowing what that right action is. As you mentioned with your group of men, white men in suits all saying love, we know it.
Would you say that if something feels uncomfortable, it's a good indicator for that it's the right thing to do?
That's a good question. I think that can often be the way. You'll think, oh, the last thing I want to do is go and do this, get up and go out running in the pouring rain or something like that. But actually, when you get back from doing something like that, you usually know your spirit says, yeah, that was the right action. That was the right thing. And that's where discipline comes in, to be quite strict with oneself. And that strictness comes in an incredibly compassionate way.
Yeah, I was just going to say that with lots of love. But for me, that's a good indicator. So I this year is going to be the year of slow. I have no clue what that is, because I'm really bad at slow. And I'm trying my best to be slow.
Well, in a couple of months' time, you're going to be very busy.
Slow.
Yeah, no, but seriously, it's beautiful, isn't it? I mean, I love watching humans. I love watching this, and I'm sure you remember, when you're holding your baby, your body does this, and you watch people, and they do it so often. There's this kind of like natural rhythm that's encoded into our being, that when we're with a child, we slow down and we start rocking and moving just very gently. And, if we can bring that sense of connection and presence into everything that we do, and if we can hold ourselves in that way, I watch myself, I've a habit of almost becoming like a whirlpool, and there's a part of me really enjoys it. But it's that still center as whatever's moving around. And,
exactly. So that's I think that's very similar. I also like the 14 espressi, and But something you said about child or children and teacher brought something up. A conversation I recently had with Noah, my 12-year-old, and he asked me, "Who's your most important teacher?" And I said, "You," because of a conversation I had with a friend more than 20 years ago, when he had his first child. And I was like, I couldn't imagine having taking on that responsibility. And I told him he's crazy. And his response was basically that first of all, should relax, and then that all you do is you help a new human understand how we do things around here. That's all you do. Right? So I extended that, and I said, okay, if I help a new human understand how we do things around here, I don't necessarily have to tell that human how we do things around here, but more how I wish we would do things around here. And in that, I am forced to question myself: what do I want it to be, and what don't I want it to be? So whenever there's a why, and they ask like 400 whys per day at least. If you force yourself to come up with a real answer every time, you'll come out as a different human being, because you have questioned all of life, everything, from why you have dessert to why some people don't have homes, everything, right? And so I'm really curious about that next person, what she's going to teach, right? Really can't wait to let her.
If I could go back, I'd definitely have more children. I've been gifted with one daughter, and the love. I remember when she was born, and it was like the inside became the outside, and the up became the down, and just the vast love, incredible, unconditional love.
Yeah.
Which really, until that moment, I'd read the words, but I didn't really know what that felt like. And to have that as a reference point, and to follow, like you say, to go on this adventure together, rediscovering life together. I think it's probably been one of the most profound spiritual journeys I've been on. For me, when all the practice up to that moment of becoming a father, I said, okay, now this is my spiritual practice. This is my teacher. And what a gift! What an incredible gift!
Yeah,
and so interesting.
Go ahead.
Yeah, just so interesting watching my daughter, not putting on my worries about climate change, not kind of bombarding her with all this stuff, but her naturally beginning to. She just did a project taking photographs around London of which places might be underwater, and kind of putting them all together in this project. And it's amazing to see young people now, the intelligence that they're holding, having been through these inquiries, and the heart-centered questions and answers. I think it's really encouraging, this generation.
Yeah, I agree. Noah is taking part in a Fridays for Future meeting, actually tonight, to become part of the steering group here in Berlin.
Fantastic.
Yeah, so I'm really impressed that he's taking that agency. He has that agency to do this at 12.
Yeah,
I surely didn't.
No. And that's it. It's that combination of understanding one's own agency, or sovereignty in action, and also having the capacity and the tools to negotiate or to navigate the emotional inner landscape, and how you realize that, because you see so many young people with what you might call eco-anxiety, really bleak vision of what the future is. And I think perhaps as elders in training, we have an opportunity to also, I mentioned about this choice point and this, to awaken the sleeping beauty within ourselves and each other, and I think that showing that, making clear that there's another option, there's another choice, that together we can create that world, I think is one of the most important things that we can do. So I certainly feel it in my heart.
Mm-hmm.
Without being a dictator and saying it's going to be like this, you got to do it like this. I don't think that's going to work at all.
That's why I call it a horizon.
A horizon.
Horizon, yeah. When I go into that, because people say, okay, who am I to describe the future? And what do I know about the world? Right? Well, nothing, and no one, but you can dream it, and then
Exactly.
you can. That's the horizon, and you're walking towards a horizon. You will never see it, because a horizon always moves with you. It'll always stay away 100 kilometers from you, or whatever, 50.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So it'll always be in the mist. You'll never see it clearly. So let's dream it up and then walk in that direction. That sometimes helps people, in my experience.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting when the work that we do, when we take people into different natural landscapes. So meeting the elements, so working with fire, water, earth, air. Maybe take people into caves sometimes, but we'll often take to a horizon, so that if they're going to be dreaming into what's next in their life, or as you were mentioning earlier, what does life need? That they have this horizon. And I think placing yourselves in these different physical environments can really assist in the process.
Yeah. The environment creates you.
Exactly.
Did you in Egyptian prison is a different you?
Yeah.
Sure.
For sure. Yeah, and it's that sense of privilege and duty, actually, having been gifted with this incredible abundance. But I certainly feel a real sense of duty and responsibility to make the most of this life and do something.
Yeah. And how do you manage to not let that be a pressure?
By making sure that I'm disciplined, and it is a discipline to do the things that I know that keep me in a good mental, physical, emotional state. So I like to dance.
You're a DJ, right? I know that.
Yeah. All sorts of things. Making it's like kind of making sure that the joy, evoking joy in one's life is important. Understanding that you've got the capacity to do that every single day, as a serious practice. So having serious fun, important. Yeah.
Well, this was serious fun here.
It was.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Thomas. And if I probably won't see you before, but I send huge blessings and love to this next adventure as being a father again.
Thank you. And send love to June.
Thank you. Well, maybe we'll get a chance to see each other in Costa Rica one day.
Yeah, just whenever you're in Berlin or in Costa Rica, let us know. Right?
Okay,
you always have a place to crash, for sure.
Thank you, and you're more than welcome to come to Cornwall with your family.
Thank you. We will, for sure, one day.
Thanks. Thanks so much.
Thank
Have a
you, man.
beautiful day.
You too.